So, after talking about Matt Marshall, it seems like everyone actually kind of liked talking about like me talking about some of the characters that I've made up over the past couple of months, and I thought for a for because of the last video, I thought I may as well do another one, and the problem was, I didn't know what to do it on, so I thought, screw it. Let's talk about the other main character in this, which is not Matt Marshall, but also not the main villain. But doesn't get much of a... It's basically a side character, I guess you can say. So, let's talk about it, this guy. Alright, so... Oh boy. So firstly, his name, Victor Baronov, or if you want to be some sort of like, if you want to go by his like nickname or something, his nickname is Fulcrum, and Victor Baronov, as you all know, as to be expected, this guy is from Russia, from the motherland, as some people would say. So, where does this guy live? Where was this guy is born? What did he do after his birth, and what happened, like, nowadays? So, Victor Baronov was born in the 70s. He's a little bit older than Matt Marshall. Well, I say a little bit older. He's quite older. He's a little far more experienced, I should say, against Matt Marshall. And he was obviously born in central Russia. Now, the original idea was that he was going to be born in Siberia, but I thought Siberia, yeah, I don't really know much about Siberia. I don't know much about like the central Russia bit either, but why not? So this guy was born in a Viktor Baronov was born with mother and father, of course, and then he had a younger brother and a younger sister, and he's the oldest, of course, of the siblings. However, throughout his life, he actually has an issue where he doesn't understand what to do in his spare time. Compared to Matt Marshall, if you compare Matt Marshall to Baronov, Matt Marshall is a massive fan of aviation and mechanics, whilst Victor actually didn't know much at all, because again, where he lived, which was the central of Russia, they didn't really do much. They weren't able to actually work on many things at all, to be honest. Now, another thing to kind of point out, after like 5 years of Victor being born, and then his younger brother being born, I think maybe his birth was when he was born in the 70s. I may be a little bit wrong, so that's already a massive oof for me. I'd say he was born around the 60s and 70s, around between those 2 years, because there's an event that's going to happen that will cause him to essentially move out from Russia, basically. So after 5 years of Victor being born and his first brother being born, the family moved from central Russia to Moscow, and then from Moscow they moved to St. Petersburg, which is where they would stay for the rest of the family life, essentially. Unfortunately, though, after the 80s, his brother, who is now around, I believe, like around 20 at this point, because he was born in, like, again, 3 years after Victor, he moved to Ukraine to work on nuclear power plants, and more like nuclear science, basically. So he moved over to Ukraine to work on the nuclear industry, basically, as people would say. But also, Victor. Victor was obviously, again, he didn't know what to do with his life. However, he had a choice to join the army during the late 70s because of a small issue in Afghanistan and Soviets in between Afghanistan and the Soviet Union at the time. He applied himself in because, again, he didn't know what to do at the time, so he said, screw it, let's join the army, why not? He joined the army, and surprisingly, he actually did, although he wasn't a fan of war at first, he did really damn well against the enemy during that time period. And keep in mind as well, as this was at a point where most of the Soviet weaponry were still a bit out of date, but he was still doing well. In fact, he did really damn well as people would say in those terms, like a juggernaut sort of soldier. He would have a good LMG, for example, maybe like a RPK, something along those lines, and he would suppress the enemy as much as possible. Basically, that's how good this guy was. He was actually really damn good at suppressing the enemy and pushing them back as far as he can. However, this whole thing with the Soviet and Afghan war actually didn't end until until 85, I believe. 85, I believe. But either way, he got out of the war in 1983 so that he can get back to his family. However, what happened was, because of his skill and his determination, the premier at the time, which was, I believe, Gorbachev, he saw this guy's potential, and he decided to move him up to Spetsnaz, which he did. He accepted the opportunity to move up to Spetsnaz. And what did he do? Did he do anything great? Unfortunately not. Now, we've all heard of those stories where the Spetsnaz soldiers have accidentally killed civilians in like at least one or two operations. Unfortunately, this one operation actually accidentally made Viktor Baronov kill a civilian, or two, or three. Yes. He accidentally killed 3 civilians after a bit of a terrorist situation in south of Russia. Now, this is a bit controversial because, again, the story that I did with this character is slightly rushed. So, please keep this in mind. I don't want anything bad to happen. I don't want anyone to assume that I'm like stealing ideas from anyone, but this is what happened, and I try to make it as unique as possible. If you ever read into like Kapkan's story in Rainbow Six, you've heard that there was an operation that happened in a school, and I believe it was in the south of Russia, if I remember rightly. Well, unfortunately, Viktor Baronov, or at this point his name was Fulcrum, at this point he was involved in that operation, but Kapkan got himself into a bit of an issue with him. Baronov, with 2 other soldiers, managed to actually get in, but accidentally again killed some civilians. He stopped doing the operation stuff in the Spetsnaz for a few years, as obviously he did something that no one should really manage to do, which is accidentally kill civilians. And he felt like this is not the way that a soldier should work, no matter what. And at the time, the Soviet Union was slowly collapsing at this point anyways. And the one reason why anyways this started to happen was because of one event in Ukraine. You know which one. Because I talked about it in the last video. The Chernobyl power plant. So, Chernobyl reactor number 4 exploded, and when Victor had heard the news, he moved from Russia to Ukraine as soon as possible, basically. What he did was he helped out with the cleaning operation. Not much, not too much, just a little bit. He got involved in the armed services and actually defended the exclusion zone from any intruders. He doesn't do it nowadays, so he claims that it was just something to help out, essentially. What didn't help out on his end was his brother, who was in that plant, and he went down into the basement where there was that radioactive water stuff. Now, there's a story of, in real life, those 3 divers that went down there survives. They survive in this universe, but Boris Baronov, which is Victor Baranov's brother, unfortunately had an issue with his legs, and he wasn't able to walk again, which is unfortunate. In the 2000s, Victor Baronov officially became Ukrainian, and stayed in Ukraine for a very long time. Until 2009, where he had to obviously stop taking care of his brother and took care of the situation in Chernobyl. Because as you all know, in 2009, a British terrorist group tried to actually take over the power plant in Ukraine, and successfully has done so. The Ukrainian Prime Minister at the time ordered as much Ukrainian soldiers, Russian/Ukrainian soldiers, to the plant to essentially sort the situation out, and the British brings in their SAS soldiers. Viktor Baronov at the time was hesitant to do this because he believed that there were civilians involved. However, there was one person in this entire operation that he felt like would get along quite well and actually understand them, and that was Matt Marshall. And at the time as well, as after all of that, I'm not going to do the Matt Marshall thing because Victor isn't involved in Matt Marshall's story as much. After the operation in the Chernobyl power plant, which was successful by the way, keep that in mind, he actually kept in contact with Matt Marshall every so often, and they became best friends. And, in fact, after all of that, in 2010, he actually got involved in one more operation with Ukraine, and then left the military to then join the air. Well, sorry, he left the Marine or the Army to then join the Air Force, because Matt Marshall at the time actually told him about the aviation industry of the Soviet Union and Ukraine at the time, and Baronov actually believed that it's a good idea to join the army, and here we are now. Thank you very much for listening to watching this video anyways. There's going to be more stories turning up pretty soon. This time it will not be on the main characters, the main human characters anyways. Next one we're going to be talking about one of my favourite characters I've actually ever worked on. And it's my own, again. And if you guys got any suggestions, maybe a bit more, I don't know, built up for the character, or if you guys expect something else from the characters, then comment down below. I don't mind. I really won't mind listening to people's ideas. Thank you very much for listening, you guys, or watching, either way. I'll see you guys all next time, I guess.